What's up, guys? It's Friday, January 15th, 2021, and welcome to this week's edition of the FritzCast. How are y'all doing this week, man? It's been some craziness that's gone on. Last week, if you joined us, we were interviewing John Ziegler, who does a host of things all over the internet, but John was a great guest, and last week's episode was one of the fastest growing episodes of FritzCast that was ever made, ever sent. And I was big with the Libertarian crowd and interviewed candidates like Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen, but John Ziegler's was peak so far, because he's so non-partisan on the issues. I got a lot of messages about disagreements with John, for sure, and it totally cool. You can have disagreements all you want, but doesn't take away from the fact that he came on the show. We had great discussions about the Capitol, about Trump supporters, all that stuff. The Capitol, Trump supporters, COVID, all that. And in my striving to make a better FritzCast this year, I'm going ham on guests. I'm trying to not every week have a guest, but almost every other week, at least twice a month. But if I can afford more, there's going to be more guests on FritzCast, because I believe it drives better content. I believe conversations with people are better. I think it opens people to more information than just me being a Fritz echo chamber, if you will, of insanity. Because if you're listening to me, you're insane, clinically, probably. But regardless, besides that, some people are asking, hey, when's a solo episode of FritzCast going to come out? Like, are you going to talk about some people apparently get their news from me. I don't know why. I don't know why you would get your news from me, but what have you. Some people are like, I need your take on the Capitol riots. I need you to break it down. I need you to tell me why I shouldn't be so afraid of the world that we're in right now. It's coming, okay? Next week's episode, I promise you, next week's episode, I don't have a guest scheduled next week. Next week's episode is going to be kind of a breakdown of some of the things that have happened over this past summer up through what happened at the Capitol on the 6th and what's happening right now with censorship and social media and all that jazz. That episode is coming. Be patient. Because that's next week's episode. I have all week from now until I record it next week to plot it out, figure it out, get my clips and everything that I'm going to use for it. And that's going to be the first FritzCast solo episode. But I rather like the guests, don't you? I rather do. And I have a great guest today. My guest today is Brad Polumbo, and Brad Polumbo, again, much like John Ziegler, has his hats in, or has many hats. He's dipping his hands in a lot of stuff all over the place. He's an opinion editor, Foundation for Economic Education. He's a contributor to the DC Examiner and National Review, senior contributor. His views are his own. He tweets a lot, and he has a great podcast called Breaking Boundaries that's available on Apple Podcast and Spotify, which we talk a little bit about as well. Brad's had a great many guests on this program in a short 3-month span, and he's having a great many more guests come on, and I'm very excited for the content that he has coming out for that. But Brad is a great mind to tap into, especially when it comes to economic policy, which we dive into. I don't know if you knew this, but Joe Biden has a $1.9 trillion, might as well just call it $2 trillion, stimulus plan, COVID relief package plan that isn't entirely COVID related. Can you believe that? And also, just to add icing to the cake, back in March last year, we had a $2.2 trillion relief plan. We had a $1 trillion one just passed in December, and now we're talking about a $2.2 trillion one. Isn't it amazing? Money printer go brrr. Anyway, Brad and I discuss a lot of topics, including his background, why his focus is on economics, his libertarian ideology, censorship, and COVID and economic relief plans and why we're in this crazy state that we're in. So rather than dragging this out and keeping you going off the edge or whatever, you're going to get my thoughts and opinions. You're going to get Fritz solo next week with a lot of things to unpack. But now, get ready because it's time for our guest this week. Brad Polumbo, welcome to FritzCast. How you doing, man?
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, appreciate having you come on. Can't wait to dive into some of these subjects that we got going on today. But before I dive into anything else, can you just explain a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. So I am an opinion journalist and economic analyst. I do writing journalism kind of from a free market, fiscally conservative or libertarian perspective for small government, free markets, that kind of stuff. And so that's what I do most of the time. I'm a columnist for the Washington Examiner, and I work at fee.org, the Foundation for Economic Education. And then I also host a podcast every week, Breaking Boundaries with Brad Polumbo. It's an interview podcast and talking to cool people. I've had a couple people like Senator Rand Paul that your audience might know. But yeah, that's mostly it. I do that, and then I tweet about my dog too.
A lot of dog tweets. But breaking boundaries, just real quick, I do want to put that out there because you had a great slew of guests on. I believe you're getting ready to have Tulsi Gabbard on as well, aren't you?
Yeah, we're still waiting on a date, but if you're, but it is going to happen sometime in the next 2 months. So if your listeners want to make sure they don't miss that, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's Breaking Boundaries with Brad Polumbo. She is, I think, one of my favorites for a lot of reasons. I disagree with her on a lot of things, but I think in general she's a pretty great gal. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I find a lot of libertarian-minded people are liking Tulsi Gabbard for the bigger issues that we do agree on, not so much the things. Obviously, we butt heads over things. Like at the end of the day, she still has a very heavy progressive lean and progressive agenda. I would say, but she's not your typical or stereotypical progressive on the talking points or anything like that. I would definitely
I think the
that
two
she's an
big
ally.
differences are basically she's not a libertarian, she's a progressive, right? But on her main issue that she spends 90% of her time talking about, which is ending foreign wars, that's pretty libertarian, right? So that's why there's so much overlap. And then the other thing that I think makes her different from the rest of the crowd is she likes to talk to people who don't agree with her, and she doesn't think they're deplorables, and she doesn't disdain them, and she doesn't call them names. So she goes on the Ben Shapiro show. I mean, not many elected Democrats would do that. So I think that's the thing, that part of why libertarians like her is she doesn't despise us just because we're not Democrats like so many other popular progressives do.
Absolutely. And I'll get a little more into that. But going back to your journalism real quick, what sparked your interest in getting into journalism, especially economic journalism? Because that seems like a very specific niche to be going towards.
Right. So I do it all too. I mean, I write about culture, I write about politics, and then but I do, when I say economics, what I really mean is policy, right? Whether it's like Biden's stimulus bill or minimum wage or rent control, that kind of stuff. Because for me, at least, those are the things that really matter. The policies that are crushing people's livelihoods and putting them out of a job, the policies that are making it illegal to go to work, or taxes that are taking God knows how much of your paycheck and burning it all away, and government waste and fraud and abuse. I have grown dissatisfied and disillusioned with kind of the media focus on what did AOC tweet today? What did Trump tweet? Well, I guess rip on that one. But right. But like this constant kind of, for example, the impeachment stuff that's going on right now. Like, it sounds bad to say this, I don't really care. I don't really care. I mean, it's all political partisans drama, and the Capitol stuff was bad. Yeah. But like, I think what is much more important actually, and will affect more people's lives, is not whether or not Trump is impeached or not, but whether or not Biden passes a $15 minimum wage nationwide and eliminates 4 million jobs. is it going to be, in the end of the day, much more impactful than kind of the partisan political stuff? So that's why I've been drawn in the last few years to the policy sphere.
Well, yeah, and I would suggest that this isn't talked about enough. You just mentioned Biden's plan. Biden has put out a proposal for I think it's 1.9 trillion. You might as well just call it 2 trillion though. But for coronavirus relief, and that's on top of what we just had in December, which was like a $1 trillion bill, correct? And then the previous bill before that in last March was $2.2 trillion, was it not?
Yeah. So basically, if Biden gets his wish list, and I almost feel bad calling it a COVID bill because it's pretty misleading to call it that. It's got all sorts of partisan goodies in there. It's basically a Trojan horse for like the Democratic liberal economic agenda. It's got a $15 minimum wage in there, for goodness sakes. What's that got to do with coronavirus? If anything, it will make things much worse in a recovery. So yeah, it would actually take the total spending. We've spent $3 trillion total. That's really, honestly, an incomprehensible sum. But for reference, that's already 3 times more than we spent on the quote unquote bailouts in 2008, 2009. And this would actually increase it to 5 trillion total. So it is a huge package. It's full of dysfunctional spending. I mean, he wants to reinstitute the welfare system that paid people nearly as much or equal to their usual jobs earnings to stay on unemployment benefits. He wants to reinstitute that through September. He wants to send out stimulus checks like candy on Halloween. I don't think that my taxpayer money, should be going to families of 5 that have an income of 250,000, but they would get thousands of dollars. Basically, I could go on and on about this stuff, but this is the kind of thing that unfortunately people don't pay enough attention to. So they just hear COVID stimulus, yeah, we need that, and they don't read the fine print. It's kind of like on iTunes when you sign up and you click I accept the terms and conditions. Well, those terms and conditions in this case are pretty darn bad, but people just hear COVID relief and then they nod along and say, yeah, we need that. And then they move on to whatever the culture war topic of the day is.
Now, just to qualify this, because I know in talking with people on Twitter, tweeting at people, which is probably not so good to go off of, but I know talking to people, they're going to be listening and they're going to say, wait a minute, he's criticizing Biden's bill left and right, and it's probably just because it's Joe Biden and it's progressives and all that. You don't have a lot good to say about the December bill that just passed either, do you?
Oh no, I was out there saying that bill sucked too. I did a whole explainer on how problematic it was. The March bill I wrote about. I've been writing about the debt and how Trump and Republicans really messed up and did not address the debt in the first 2 years when they had unified control. So I think it's fair when progressives say, oh, now look, all of a sudden Republicans in Congress care about the debt again. Like, they're not wrong. There are a lot of like phony deficit hawks. There are a lot of hypocrites, but I can take pride and I have the receipts to show like that is not me. I've been pretty consistent on this stuff. The same way, like, so few people have been consistent on the rioting is always bad. Violence is always bad. Like, I was out here when BLM was rioting saying this is bad, stop this is wrong, this is hurting innocent people. And I'm out here when they attacked the Capitol and hurt a police officer and smashed windows and did all this and saying that's bad. And the Democrat officials who called BLM a summer of love, right? Like, they can't really do that with very much credibility. And that's why consistency on this stuff is so important. But I feel pretty good about where I've been at through all of it.
Yeah, and consistency to me is the key anyway. This plays a lot into, as you mentioned, the Capitol. When the Capitol unfolded on the 6th and I watched it, I watched at home horrified at what I was seeing. Some people were, joking and making memes and stuff and saying it's not that big a deal. But ultimately, we saw a lot of violence at the Capitol. And me, my key is I don't like violence. I really don't like violence. And I didn't like it at the Capitol. I didn't like it over the summertime when we saw protests and rioting and looting and all that stuff. But the rhetoric that comes out kind of fuels what's going on, does it not? I mean, you like you said, it was over the summertime. We had CNN standing in front of burning buildings saying it's a fiery but mostly peaceful protest. I mean, this is This is the voices of the unheard. This is legit. This is what we have to go through. Yeah, it's kind of terrible, but it's kind of necessary. And then when it flips to the opposite side, and we have a capital siege, if you will, now it's bad, but really both are bad. I mean, they are on different levels, but the rhetoric spilling in creates the environment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And I think anyone who says that the other side is the one that uses the extreme rhetoric only is being dishonest with themselves because, I mean, you could go back and find examples of Democrats saying the Republican healthcare bill will murder people, or tax cuts will mean thousands of people will die, or net neutrality repeal will destroy the internet as we know it. You could go back and find Congresswoman Maxine Waters telling people to go confront Trump officials and go get up in their face and form a crowd and all sorts of crazy stuff. Nancy Pelosi during the whole child separation drama, which was quite bad, to be fair, but she was telling people, why aren't there uprisings throughout the country right now? So it's like these people also do a lot of this stuff. And at the same time, I mean, Trump encouraged his people to go to the Capitol, stole an election. And he said things like at his rallies before, get that guy, beat him up, do all that. Like, nobody here is really pure. We can talk about gradations and who's worse and whatever, but like at the end of the day, Republicans and Democrats both suck, especially on the matters of rhetoric, because they all are more interested in riling up their base and getting reelected than they are in kind of healing or unifying or taking a reasonable, nuanced tone to just about anything.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And that's the sad bit, is that this is coming out of our leaders. I don't believe that the American people are really like this, but the leadership, the people that set the standards, really do suck at this. I mean, it's when you're in a position of power like that, I would suggest that you really do have to choose your words carefully. And I think that there's just been a lot of carelessness in that.
So yeah, I agree with what you just said. I actually don't think most people are like that. If you walk down the street and talk to a random Democrat, right? If I called my mom, who voted for Biden, voted for Clinton, like she would not believe any of this stuff. She would not think BLM riots are okay. And conversely, you know, the average Trump supporter is not okay with what happened at the Capitol. But what's happened increasingly is that both sides cater to the 10% that is most extreme of their base, right? Because of the way that primary elections work. That in a general election, you have a lot more people voting. It's kind of a swath of the public, right? But primary elections for politicians have extremely small pools of voters. And the only people that tend to show up to those primary elections are people who are extreme and passionate and really the fervent zealots. And so both parties' elected officials, they kind of cater to and cower in fear of the 10 to 20% of their base that's super extreme and super energetic, because AOC and her stands might primary Chuck Schumer if he doesn't say BLM rioting is great, right? Or vice versa. You might get a Trumpist challenge if you condemn the Capitol riots or don't vote to deny the election results. From the MAGA of the most MAGA of MAGA bases on the right. So it's like, unfortunately, these two increasingly extreme groups of people have more and more sway in our politics.
Yeah, and truly, I would think that that's a sad thing to come to, and that brings me to where we are right now. I actually read your article that you posted on Fee the other day. I believe it was yesterday, about these protesters in Portland outside of a bookshop because of Andy Ngo's new book, correct? And so Andy Ngo, who is Andy Ngo? I mean, just not everybody that watches my show knows who Andy Ngo
Right.
is. I know he's a street journalist.
Yeah, I don't know him too well, but he's a journalist for conservative news outlets, the New York Post, the Post Millennial, and he basically just follows around Antifa and goes to events and catalogs what they do. And so he's kind of a man on the street. He does lots of stuff on Antifa, and he lives in Portland. So he's right at the center of kind of all that hard left radicalism. And he actually was assaulted by Antifa, pretty viciously beaten about a year or two ago. He had a brain injury from it. And so that was a big national story at the time. But anyway, he's this conservative journalist. He chronicles Antifa, and he has this new book out called Unmasked that exposes Antifa. I haven't even read the book, but here's why it caught my attention. Mobs descended on this Portland bookstore, demanding that they remove it from the catalog and stop selling it. Right? These are the supposed anti-fascists who are embracing the book burning of the Nazis, right? And that's what was so galling to me, that it's so alarming when people think that somehow they're the progressives when they're the ones trying to ban books.
Yeah, yeah, and this is this not only plays into what was going on there. I mean, obviously, it's funny. It's always Portland for some reason. It's like that's where the 10% of the most extreme progressive people live. I don't know.
Yeah,
But we have that level or that example of censorship. They want this book not sold in the bookstore. The bookstores, they didn't put it on their physical shelves, from what I understand. It's still on their online catalog. And they have come out and said that we sell books from left to right, and there's ones that we agree with and love. There's ones that we loathe and we don't like at all. But this is what we're supposed to do as a bookstore. We provide the book. If you want to buy it, you buy it. If you don't buy it. Leave it on the shelf. But
isn't it crazy that that's controversial now?
That is, I mean, it is controversial. And it's not just with this book either. There was something like 2 years ago or so where I remember a Twitter campaign. I don't remember some of the specific details, but it was over plates. It was over plates, and it said something about, stuff yourself until your belt bursts or something. And somebody was like, well, this is fat shaming. And they went on a Twitter campaign, and the company removed selling the plates, even though, like, what is there to be angered about? Like, if you don't like the plates, don't buy the plates. It didn't say go out and kill somebody on the plates. I could understand it maybe if it was that, but something as trivial as that, where I saw it, I got offended, I'm going to start an outrage mob and get it banned. That's scary territory.
It is, because fundamentally it's always been left right, kind of an American principle and idea that I might hate what you have to say, but I'll die for your right to say it, right? This idea that we seek to debate ideas rather than squash them was for a long time fundamental to who we are. But now you have this faction on the left that wants to stamp out dissent. These are the same people who, sometimes it's through the government, sometimes it's not. They're encouraging boycotts and corporations to erase people from the internet. And it's bizarre, because I think that there's this conceit when your response to, say, a prominent conservative like Andy No or Ben Shapiro or someone like this is, we need to get him banned from Twitter, or we need to get his book banned from our stores. What you're essentially admitting is that you can't argue against him. You know that if he is allowed to speak and his arguments are allowed to flow, you will lose. There's something pretty galling in that. Like, you actually think your own ideas are too weak. Basically, you have to convince people. This is what they did in Fahrenheit 451. The famous book everyone read in high school, right? Where they had firemen who went around burning books. They wanted to control what people could think. So what they did is they took away the options. They burned all the books so they could control the information that people were able to receive. And then therefore they could control what people were able to think. And in doing so, any kind of totalitarian movement, left or right, that seeks to do that is essentially admitting that they can't win an argument. They know their ideas cannot withstand challenge in an open debate. And this is the same kind of thing you see when, like, conservatives say it should be illegal to burn the American flag, right? Well, I certainly would never ban the American flag myself. I love America, but it's people's speech right to do so if they want. And what you're saying, if you have to ban it, you're saying that you are incapable of arguing for patriotism, that your patriotism is so empty that it must be mandated on others through the law. And to me, that's a stunning indictment of your own case.
Yeah, no, 100% it is. And then there is also just the argument of, take Trump, for example. Trump banned off of Twitter. Twitter comes out with their release saying why they did that. They've gone on and barred several other prominent people on Trump's side from the platform entirely. Parler lost its servers from Amazon and got pulled entirely. And there's something to be said about, I understand the reaction to it because of what transpired, but at the same token, when you go on an active campaign like this, I have fears as a person. Like, I don't want to see Trump's tweets. I don't look at Trump's tweets. Simple as that. I think Twitter has great self-policing tools of controlling what content you do see and don't see. But when you actively go on a campaign to remove it, I feel like you're toying with fate and playing with fire even more, because now you have dumped fuel on a fire that kind of emboldens people to the conspiracy almost. Like, see, they are out to get us. They are silencing us. They are removing us. And it keeps that rhetoric rolling. It dumps more fuel onto it, and that fire gets even bigger, and it's even harder to extinguish now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is kind of a tough issue for libertarians because two things can be true at once. Social media companies are private companies. They are not the government. So they're not legally bound by the First Amendment. And they shouldn't be either. But we can separate the question of the law from what these companies ought to be doing. And I really strongly find what they're doing morally reprehensible and objectionable in massive platforming of the president of the United States and conservatives writ large. Here's the thing. If you truly believe that what Trump said on Twitter constituted incitement to violence, which it certainly doesn't under the legal standard of what that means, but you could say that it does under the kind of everyday, delete those tweets, censor those tweets. But the perma ban of the mainstream political figure for 75 million Americans sends a signal to the entire country that we think your beliefs are beyond the pale of acceptable opinion. We hate you. We think that you are so vile that you should not even be heard. And I think that will only exacerbate every problem we have in this country, because our problems right now are driven by division. They're driven by hyperpartisanship and polarization. And what's going to happen now that Trump is banned? His loyal diehard base of 10 or 20 million people or whatever it may be is going to follow him to the edges of the internet, to Newsmax TV, or to Gab. I don't really know, right? Some new thing that will crop up. And they will be in this tiny far right echo chamber where they won't have any exposure to fact checks, like at least on Twitter, right? If Trump tweets something, in the replies, there's thousands of people disagreeing, citing other sources, right? So anyone who looks at a Trump tweet is also going to see the other side, right? These people will follow Trump to this silo, and it will be just a pure, unadulterated echo chamber of MAGA and far right kind of festering. And that's going to lead to, there's this law of group polarization. If you're in a group that is an echo chamber, you just keep getting more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. Now, we literally want the opposite of that to happen. The Capitol attack showed us that there is a small slice of Trump supporters, right? It's not most Trump supporters, but a small slice that has really gone far too far. They've become fringe. They've become really radicalized. They believe in QAnon conspiracies, this kind of stuff. We need those people to come back to the center, or to kind of reconnect with the greater society. And this, I really do believe that this will have the opposite effect of siloing these people off. Will only make another Capitol attack or something like it. Like you said, it will only play into the narrative. This is like confirmation bias for QAnon.
Yeah. And it's scary all around to try to figure out where to move on from here. Now, you and we're libertarians, or libertarian leaning, at least anyway. I believe I heard in one of the interviews that you did with one of my pals that you're actually a registered libertarian voter, correct?
Yeah, I haven't really. Yeah, so when I first registered to vote, I did register as a libertarian, and I voted for Gary Johnson. But then I honestly just haven't updated it. I don't know if I would have chosen to stay as a libertarian. I don't think I would have registered as a Republican. I might have changed to independent, but I am still technically a registered Libertarian Party voter.
Right. But well, at least you're into libertarian and conservative philosophy, though.
Oh, for sure. Just the partisan politics of all of it, really, I find distasteful, and I hate I hate both mainstream political parties. I think they're so dysfunctional and broken. And the LP, I have a lot of concerns about, frankly. I hope it's getting better. There's some people coming to power who are much more promising than past ones. But I've never found it to be a very attractive alternative, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely very libertarian or classically conservative in the philosophical sense.
Yeah, and I agree with that. There's problems with the LP, and I've interviewed many a person on that. That's actually been my focus over the past year or so, because I feel like opportunities have been there, and I feel like there's not the proper, I guess, coordination and the proper people in power and the proper focus moving it forward.
Yeah, I really think that a successful Libertarian Party could have done so much better. It's kind of nuts to me that they couldn't get 5 or 10% of the vote minimum against such two horrible candidates. Trump and Biden are really bad candidates, deeply flawed, deeply disliked by broad swaths of the American public. The libertarian message on a ton of issues, right? Whether it's criminal justice reform or drug decriminalization or gay marriage or literally cutting taxes. Like, it's a bringing the troops home. These are popular messages that pull very highly with broad swaths of the public, including both parties' voters. So it's like, if you have weak opposition, and then you have ideas that are actually popular, but you're getting basically 0 votes or like 1%, right? There's two things going on there. One, I certainly acknowledge that in many ways the system's rigged against third parties. So I'm not saying it's all their fault, right? There's a lot of uphill climbs. But two, you got to take some accountability. Clearly, you're doing something wrong as a party when you have such a promising avenue before you and you're getting such meager results time and time again.
Absolutely, and that makes me wonder going forward. I think we're in for some really trying months ahead, and probably years to be more accurate about it. Just because we're in such a divided and divisive state, and too many people, the rhetoric isn't swinging towards a more center-minded style of thinking. How do you think that we can broaden our appeal to those people and start kind of drowning out the more prominent voices that are fueling this thing, fueling the divide, fueling, the partisan play? How can we dive in and get people more away from that and strengthening the middle ground?
So I actually think one of the problems is just name recognition and money. So, for example, Donald Trump, why did he win the Republican nomination and have such a head start? It's because the whole country already knew who Donald Trump was. People in politics that I talk to, they really can't state enough how important name recognition is, name ID. So I think the LP should never run a presidential candidate again who does not have existing levels of high name ID. Someone like Jo Jorgensen, you know what? Seems like a great lady. No one knew who she was before she ran for president. Even someone like Justin Amash, who has significantly high name recognition, still a lot of people don't know who he is, but he would at least have a huge head start compared to a total no-name candidate, right? But if you had somebody like Rand Paul, who most of the country probably knows who he is, or if you had somebody that was like a celebrity, right? If you got, I don't know, Matthew McConaughey or Dwayne The Rock Johnson, or I'm just pulling names out of my head, but somebody who has a bunch of money to self-fund a campaign and then a bunch of name recognition, because at the beginning, the hardest part is getting noticed. I really think that's the biggest hurdle, because if the Libertarian Party message and a more mainstream version of it could get out there, I think it would do really well. But the system is closed off to it. The media is largely closed off to it. And so you need somebody who can break that. Like, if Trump had started out as a no-name candidate, the gatekeepers would have never let him in. But because he could self-fund his primary campaign in 2016, because he started with 90% name ID, no one could stop him. And I think that's what the LP needs in terms of national elections.
Well, hopefully they can get something together and really start moving to make an impact. Hopefully that is what happens. Brad, I've had you for a little over a half hour now. Let's get ready to wrap this up. Where can people find you and your work online?
The easiest way is check out my Twitter. It's Brad_Polumbo, Polumbo. Also made an Instagram recently for political stuff. That's just Brad Polumbo, Polumbo. Most importantly, definitely check out the podcast. I think if they like your show, and I know I do, they'll like mine too. It's Breaking Boundaries with Brad Polumbo on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
All right. Well, Brad, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
All right, guys. So that was Brad Polumbo on FritzCast. Be sure to check out Breaking Boundaries and follow him at Brad_Polumbo on Twitter, which is going to be tagged. So if you came on Twitter, it's tagged. It's right there. Just click his name. It'll take you to his page. Oh, man. Thanks for listening, though, guys. And next week, remember, the solo 2021 debut episode of FritzCast, where you're just going to get me. Maybe you get Bernie Sanders because he's going to be Joe Biden's labor management committee. Or, no, not labor management. I'm going to be the guy in charge of the purse strings from now on. So it's going to be everybody thought Bernie Sanders was going to be gone. Not so. No, Fritz. Not so. I'm going to be here for quite a long time. So that's going to be next week's episode. But guys, do me a favor. If you liked this, give it a like. If you're on YouTube, just click the like button. All right. If you want to leave a comment, leave a comment. It's great. Great boost for the podcast. If you have Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever your podcast catcher is, go onto the page. Give us a rating, a review, 5 stars if you can handle it. I mean, they're about to pass another stimulus package. I'm pretty sure giving out stars for podcasts is in there, and if it's not, then there's some seriously fucked up shit going on in this world. But do that for me. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next week.